Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into my channel. I'm Kidest, and in this video we're going to talk about how moving away from fear brings you closer to your desire. Now let's first define what I mean by moving away from fear. So we're not talking about avoiding or suppressing the emotional experience of fear, but rather moving yourself up the scale of emotions, up the scale of emotional tones and levels of consciousness so that you are resonating in the vicinity of the vibration of your desire, the vibration of your fulfillment. Now, ideas, desires, intentions, visions, dreams are high frequency patterns of consciousness. They resonate in the vicinity of joy and excitement and enjoyment, and those emotions your nervous system translates as positive. So when you are in a fear response, when you are in that stress response state that your nervous system moves into when you perceive a threat in your environment, when you perceive something that your neurology, your physiology, your nervous system evaluates as a potential danger, when you move into that response, you contract. You move into a vibrational tone, a vibrational resonance that is contracted, that doesn't really hold a lot of life energy in it, because the sole focus of that survival response, of the stress response, which is when you experience fear, is survival. It's not about creativity. It's not about creative problem solving. It's not about imagining or connecting to the higher perspective of your higher self or your inner being. So moving away from fear and reconnecting to the vibration of your desire is all about shifting the emotional tone that you are activating, perpetuating, and sustaining in your nervous system. Now, the fear response, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, natural. It's part of our survival programming. It's part of what allows us to move away from danger and toward experiences that ensure and affirm and give continuity to our life experience, to our aliveness. So you don't want to create a negative impression of that emotion of fear or any of the lower frequency emotions as being bad. Emotions are just information. They are carrier waves of information and life energy that give you feedback on how much energy is available and circulating in your nervous system, how much energy is available and circulating in your life. So it's important to recognize the impact of stress. As far as deliberate creation is concerned, it's important to understand that, moving into stress states moves you into contraction. It sort of disconnects you from higher brain functions, your ability to imagine, your ability to dream, your ability to magnetize and be receptive to the things that you've asked for. And in that understanding, what you want to create a new habit around is getting that information, getting that information that you're stressed or that you're in a stress state, and recognizing what that means in a constructive and positive way. So again, we're not talking about suppressing or avoiding any of the stress responses, but rather deliberately and intentionally acknowledging where you are, knowing where you are on that scale of emotions, which I'll share shortly, and moving yourself into the receptive and magnetic states that vibrate at a faster frequency, that are faster moving waves of energy and information. So one of the most awesome tools out there to sort of give yourself a quantifiable sort of measurement tool is David Hawkins' scale of consciousness. In his work over 20 years, he calibrated some over 200,000 and identified where emotions vibrate, what sort of frequency range they vibrate at. And he used a logarithmic scale to do this, and he provided a really useful sort of quantitative map that you can use that's really useful in helping yourself identify where you are and where you need to get to. So we'll take a look at the scale of consciousness and go even more into, why it is that moving away from fear brings you closer to your desire. So if you take a look at the scale of consciousness, you will see that he's sort of identified levels that indicate where you are holding yourself on that scale of consciousness. So at the lower end, you have the level of shame, the level of guilt, the level of apathy, the level of grief, the level of fear, the level of what he calls desire, and we'll go more into that, the level of anger, and the level of pride. Now, this range from shame to pride, so from 20 hertz to 175, is a kind of emotional and psychological positioning that moves you into contraction. This is where things feel like you're having to make effort. They feel like you're having to sort of argue with your environment, argue with your sort of experiences in your environment to get the things that you want. This is the realm of pressure, where you feel pressured to get things done, where you feel like the things that you do aren't, bringing a result. The things that you try aren't bearing fruit. So there's just a lot more tension in this range from 20 to 175. So we'll start at the lower end of this range at 20 hertz, and you'll see that that range is a range where that's when you feel stuck. That's where you feel like you can't move in your experience, that you are immobile, that you're sort of shut down even. And that level of consciousness, I've elaborated on David Hawkins' work to sort of give you a more elaborate range, or a more detailed range of emotions you can associate with these levels. So in that shame level, you have a sense of powerlessness. You have a narrative of being defective, that there's something wrong with you. You feel invisible. So they're emotional states and sort of psychological positions, mindsets, where you don't feel like you can. You feel helpless, you feel unable, you feel incapable, and you generally just aren't moving life energy. You aren't really flowing source energy. You aren't really flowing universal energy through your nervous system. And then you move up from that to about 30, and you have guilt. And the level of guilt is, again, in that low vibrating, contracted, tense range. And this is why it's important to release these emotions, and what's part of that moving away from these lower frequencies to get closer to the energy of your desire is so important. So if you feel guilt anywhere in your life, if you feel remorse, if you feel regret, while these are all valid emotions in the human experience, when it comes to deliberate creation, these are patterns of energy and information you want to release, that you want to clear, that you want to flush out of your nervous system, so that you can get into those magnetic, receptive, empowered, expanded states, the high vibrating states that we'll get to. So if you move up from guilt, you go into apathy. That's a bit at 50 hertz. So that level, you have boredom and humorlessness. You kind of feel dissociated from your experiences. You feel indecisive. You feel inattentive. And again, these additional emotions that I've noted are to give you a more granular awareness of what's there in these ranges and these levels of emotional tones. So after apathy, you have grief, and grief is at 75 hertz. And again, while it's a totally valid emotion, while grief is a natural response to the human experience, and in the human experience, it's meant to provide you with that information, and then you're meant to release it. You're meant to, process and integrate the loss, and then get back to the life energy rich states. So grief, despair, sorrow, sadness, again, feeling unloved, feeling unworthy, feeling helpless are sort of all clustered in this lower frequency, slower moving energy states. After grief, you have fear, and the level of fear lands at about 100 hertz. And this is associated with the lower intensity emotional patterns of anxiety, worry, overwhelm, panic, concern. All of these are sort of fear spectrum emotions. And if you notice the difference between where fear resonates and where joy resonates, you'll understand why moving away from fear brings you closer to your desire. Because your desire, which is a natural creative impulse, which is a natural sort of evolutionary impulse to move you forward, vibrates in the realm of joy and excitement. When you pay attention to the pure energy of a desire, when you have that recognition that you want to create something, that you want to manifest something, that you want to bring something new into your experience, that feeling of that pure desire, that feeling of that pure creative impulse is joy. It's high vibing, it's fast moving energy. It floods your nervous system with sort of excitement and aliveness. You feel alive, you feel alert, you feel energized by that desire that's sort of emerging through your awareness and in your nervous system. So if you take a look at where fear vibrates and where joy and excitement vibrates, that gives you a real idea of why you need to move away from fear, why you need to move up the scale of emotion so that you can stay in alignment, so that you can stay in the vibrational resonance, so that you can, receive the thing that you want to manifest. So after fear, you have what Hawkins calls desire, but really when you break down what he's calling desire, it's the sort of greed, hoarding, impatient and satisfied, sort of I never have enough, that type of energy. It's not the desire as we term it in deliberate creation. It's not intention and vision and desire from that perspective. So you have what he calls desire resonating at or landing at or calibrating at 125 hertz. After that, you have anger at 150 hertz. And again, any current that is defiant, frustrated, irritated, that's sort of blaming others or that's being critical, either self-critical or critical of others. Again, this is a low frequency energy pattern that moves you into contraction, that slightly or intensely, momentarily disconnects you from the energy of your desire, from your intention. After anger, you have what he calls pride. And again, if you break down what he terms pride, it's the sort of self-absorbed, entitled, superior, arrogant, boastful kind of emotional energy. And again, that's contracted. It's not the perspective of your higher self. It's not the perspective of your inner being. It's the ego frequency that, either overinflates to position itself as better than others. And it's a low frequency contracted pattern of emotion. After pride, you start to move into what he terms the sort of the power emotions. And he differentiates between the two sort of quadrants here, where the lower vibrating emotions are sort of force. They're forceful. When you're running those emotions, you're sort of in a forceful state. You try to force things to happen. You try to sort of control your environment. You try to control people. So you try to move into these combative, forceful, antagonistic type of relationships with your environment and the people in your environment. So he terms that range or that level of consciousness from 20 to 175 as sort of force types of consciousness. So after pride, you move to the spectrum of the level of courage, the level of neutrality, the level of willingness, the level of acceptance, the level of reason, the level of love, the level of joy, the level of peace, and the level of enlightenment. And again, if you take a look at these levels, the emotions you experience within them are exactly the emotions that feel really good to your nervous system. When you're feeling empowered, when you're feeling motivated, when you're feeling confident and adventurous, you are flowing more life energy. You are connected to the flow of universal energy. You are open and receptive to that flow of source energy through your nervous system. So in these levels, you show up open, you show up expansive, you show up optimistic and eager and curious and ready to explore your world. You are trusting of yourself and the universe. You feel supported and you feel supportive of those around you. You feel flexible. You're understanding. You sort of step into the states of empathy and understanding naturally. And you are, in a state of enthusiasm and playfulness. You feel grateful, you feel appreciative. And these energies are where your desire vibrates. These energies are where your intention and vision vibrate. So you want to deliberately and intentionally move up the scale anytime you go into contraction. Contraction happens. Life experiences being what they are, challenges arise, and your sort of nervous system goes into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, where sort of survival becomes the main focus. So recognizing that these survival states are normal, but then deliberately and intentionally moving yourself up the scale, up the levels, so that you're back to that state, that level of your connectedness to the whole, your connectedness to the universe, your connectedness to source energy, your connectedness to your higher self or inner being, and that overall sense of being in your power, being in your co-creative power, being in your co-creative seat. So this is a really useful map to have. You can, print this, put it somewhere in front of you so that you have that reminder that while the lower frequency emotions are natural and valid for the human experience, when it comes to deliberate creation, that's not where you're magnetic. That's not where you're receptive. Those emotional states are not where you are in your full power. You are in your full, broader perspective, connected and integrated with your higher self or inner being. So moving away from fear, moving up the scale of emotions, moving into that realm of joy and excitement is how you stay connected and receptive to manifest the things you want to manifest.